All right, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Julie Cobflesh, and I work with WeRPN as the Senior Advisor, Communications and Engagement. I want to say up front, I'm not a nurse, although I very much love nurses and have spent a lot of my career as a communicator working in the health sector, so that I've had a lot of opportunities over the years to work with nurses. I'm very honored to be here today as the facilitator for this session. And I want to wish everyone a happy nursing week. I hope you're having a really enjoyable week. Um, Before we get to the fireside chat, I just want to do a quick land acknowledgement. So we'd like to begin the session by acknowledging that WeRPN is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe peoples. With this, we respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land, as they are our original caretakers. We acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people endure in Canada, and we accept responsibility as a professional organization to contribute towards revealing and correcting misinformation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching, research, care provision, and community service. So I encourage you, I think we're coming here tonight from all parts of Ontario, and it's always good to reflect on the land that you are yourself sitting on this evening, and have that respectful reflection as well. So I encourage everyone to do that. So before I turn everything over to Dianne, we have a wonderful hour planned for you where Dianne and Ashley Fox are going to have an engaging discussion. I want to first do a quick introduction of Dianne. Before I do that, I do want to mention that if you have questions throughout the session tonight, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And you can submit your questions and we'll get to them after Dianne and Ashley have gone through some of the questions that they have. For those who don't know Dianne, she is the CEO of WeRPN and a passionate advocate for nurses in Ontario. As a nurse herself for over 40 years, Dianne began her career as an RPN in 1979 and is still dually registered as both an RPN and an RN. She's worked across clinical, leadership, and policy roles and is widely recognized for her contributions to nursing, including in the development of an internationally used knowledge process model. Dianne is the daughter of a nurse, the mother of a nurse, and a tireless voice for those who care for others. So now I will turn it over to you, Dianne, to introduce our guest.
Thanks, Julie. I also like to sometimes let people know that I absolutely, in this role that I've been in for 20 years, work as an RPN. If you followed me around for a day, you'd find out that it's very true. But also sometimes I get to become very familiar once again with how RPNs are treated, because sometimes that's my reality as well. So I just want to let you know that I consider myself one of you. Welcome to today's fireside chat. Now, I'm so pleased to have Ashley here because uh, she's just someone that I've watched really closely lately and really admired and been very interested in her experiences. And next time, Ashley, that you come to see us, I promise you we'll do it at a fireside. We'll actually have a fireplace between us and we'll do the real thing. But I just want to introduce Ashley. We're thrilled to have her here, Ashley Fox, as part of WeRPN's 2025 Nursing Week programming. Ashley is a dedicated registered practical nurse and a passionate advocate for healthcare, having run as a candidate in the recent provincial election in Perth Wellington for the Ontario Liberal Party. We're going to talk a lot about that experience. Ashley has spent 2 terms as Vice President, RPN at the Ontario College of Nurses, and as a board member of Community Living North Perth. She also She is also a course instructor at Conestoga College and a mentor here at WeRPN. So grateful for that. As a reminder, WeRPN is a non partisan group. I'm going to explain that a little bit. We don't have any particular political party that we endorse. We recognize that our membership choose to vote for all of the parties for their own reasons. So we do work very closely with the government of the day to make sure that your voice is heard by the decision makers. But we really, you'll notice that this is a non-partisan sort of presentation. So if you're wondering about that, we can talk more about that as well. So we don't formally endorse any party over another, but we really aim to create strong relationships with key decision makers across parties to ensure that perspectives and concerns of RPNs on key professional practice and health policy issues are heard. For example, this morning I was at Queen's Park. I started off with the NDP party, went right into meetings with Liberals, had lunch with the leader of the Liberal Party, and talked with the Conservative MPPs on the way home from Queen's Park. So, as in this particular role, we engage with everyone to make sure that everyone knows what your needs are. In today's conversation, we're going to dive into Ashley's experience as an RPN on the campaign trail. If you watch that up close, it's really fascinating. And the valuable lessons that she has learned on this unique journey, and why having nursing voices across all sectors is imperative to advancing our profession. RPNs have a crucial perspective to offer in shaping public policy, and we're excited to delve into how we can collectively strengthen our representation and advocate for the needs of our profession and our patients. This is about empowering RPNs and understanding how we can all contribute to a stronger healthcare system. So, Ashley, thank you for being here and sharing your insights with us today. We're really eager to hear your story.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really actually very excited to be here. One is, my passion obviously is nursing. It's always been in nursing, and where we're leading off from that. And then I realized that as an advocate, there's more to it than that, which led into my next passion, which is politics. So I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to share because I think as RPNs, we have a lot to offer.
So I have some questions I'm going to ask Ashley today, but we're going to be very informal about it. I'm going to share some of my observations of Ashley on the campaign trail. She was running for office in my hometown where I grew up, so I was very excited to have an RPN running there, and I watched very closely everything that happened. So I'm excited to talk about this today. So to start, Ashley, RPNs are on the front lines of healthcare every day, and RPNs witness firsthand the challenges that nurses are facing in the healthcare system. From your perspective, what are some of the most pressing issues that RPNs are facing today?
There's no shortage on the list, I'll be honest. And I did see that the State of the Union report did come up for the RPNO as well. And surprisingly, a lot of them are going to be kind of common themes as we go along. But, the number one thing is wages. And when I'm talking to people at the doors when I'm campaigning, very often I'll hear from people who are in education and healthcare because we're very, very similarly aligned, very similar policies. Um, and the question I get from people in the public is, well, don't you make enough? Or isn't that a living wage? They don't understand that from a public perspective, long-term care, hospital, home care, they all come with different scope of practice. They all come with different wage parameters. And then there's also the additional pressures that we see. So one of the things that led me down my political road initially, was remember the pandemic bonuses. Like that was such a controversial topic, right? Is who's going to be eligible? How much are they going to be eligible? Who gets it at the end of the day? How are we going to qualify them?
Yeah.
And then what my biggest fear was, okay, if there's a financial incentive and it's tied to certain roles, where are those people coming from? Which is what I was more worried about. Okay, we're going to circle the drain with the same staff, and have certain sectors that are going to go short. And can we manage having those other sectors that they didn't deem essential? Can they run short? So again, we're talking like, can we be fair and equitable across our sector as it is? The next one that came up was ratios, and pandemic and post-pandemic world that we're in, that became a very big and clear indicator to a lot of people because they hadn't seen it firsthand. Then when they started to realize, the timing of being able to go to the washroom, access to care when people are becoming more complex, more complicated, people did really take notice then, right? And a lot of the conversations were, okay, how many nurses or how many PSWs? What does a day look like? What's feasible? What's manageable? I live in the rural part of my riding, and it's also, commuting, traveling, transportation access, right? We want to make sure that, a typical 8-hour shift in the city is not going to be the same as it is in Listowel or Mount Forest. Um, and then it was also leading to access to care, order changes, medical directives, burnout with the shortages, things of that nature. It's all interconnected, right? And it's all impacting RPNs, it's all impacting the sector.
That's really interesting that you could bring that perspective. Ashley, do you know, has there ever been an RPN elected to the legislature? We have RNs. I had lunch with an RN today, but I wonder if there's ever been an RPN.
Haven't seen one. And to be honest, I've only dabbled in the last couple elections, for lack of better wording, to even see if there's been RPN candidates.
Yeah.
I'm always happy to have those conversations with people of even what they're expecting, what they're looking into. Um, Generally speaking, regardless of the party, there's usually a need to change or a want to change, right? That's what initially leads people into politics. The next common theme that you see is people will ask you, are you interested in running? I'm going to say the common theme I've heard across 99% of people is, oh my gosh, no. And that's literally the first reaction, regardless of whether they're an RPN, regardless of any other sector that they're in. There's usually I want to see a change. Do you want to make a change? And then it's like, no. And then there comes a process, right? You start to think about it. You start to make an informed decision. You start to weigh those pros and cons, as one does, and then people lean towards it, and then they start to think, okay, well, what's next? How do I get involved? How do we make policy changes? Politics is so messy in the last few years. There's so much um, political turmoil, for lack of better wording. Like, there's just so much hate, there's so much negativity that people are really afraid to go into that realm, I think. But then the other side of that is that it influences so much of people's lives. um, I ran in 2022. I'm obviously running again in 2025. The differences between those two campaigns, even for myself, mentally just taking it in, is so different because in 2025, we were looking at legislative poverty, right? We were looking at policies that impact people living with disabilities, people that are living in communities, living centers, institutionalized care for long-term care, seniors. And at the end of the day, I felt that truly, not just as a nurse, but at the end of the election, you have to kind of mentally debrief yourself because you know that people's lives, it sounds very dramatic, but people's lives are influenced by our decisions.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so to be clear, neither you or I are suggesting that the only way to advocate for what RPNs need is by running for office. And we're going to talk a little bit about the experience of campaigning in a few minutes. And trust me, I don't think that's for everybody. I couldn't do it. But you did it with grace and you did it with resilience. And like I said, we'll get into that in a few minutes, some of the things that I observed and hear about some of your experiences. But it would be really helpful if we, sort of looked at if you want to run for office. I mean, we're all here for resources for you to help you if you're an RPN who wants to run for office. But what are some of the other ways, Ashley, that you think that it would be really helpful for RPNs to advocate for what they need?
Initially, I started down that road. Initially, I had entered into home care where I had been many, many years ago, and then went into a retirement sector for a little bit. And I started to notice that there was some changes at home care that I really was being vocal about, professional, of course, but vocal, saying, is this in the best interest of our patients? Or how do we advocate for more based on, legislative changes? And it caught the attention of some political people in general, and they reached out and had meetings with me. And I remember sitting across from them at those meetings going, at that point, running for office or even a discussion about politics was completely out of my mind. It was completely out of theirs just as well. But it was, how do we change what we need to change for our patient? And just tell me, like, step by step by step. Um, an individual that I met with had said, you're not going to believe this. It's actually in legislation. There's a whole other process. There's a ball game we have to do. And I went, yeah, okay, not really interested. I really just want to know how to change it. Like, just walk me through the steps. And so they did walk me through a little bit of steps. They said, you know, you can get involved doing getting involved in the media, doing form letters, emails, things of that nature. But one of the things that really hit home was building a relationship. So actually scheduling meetings with your MPP, your provincial elected official, and your member of parliament. So knowing the distinctions between the levels of government. Um, they also said that, you know, advocating the right contact. I hear so much at the doors from patients, but also as well as campaigning. You know, I've emailed so and so or I've called someone and I never hear back. Or how do I get what I'm trying to achieve? They're not answering me. So it's getting them in touch with the right contact. Healthcare is primarily provincial. There are some federal aspects to it, but it is mainly provincial. So making sure that they have the right contact first, right, to be able to follow up with them, and getting involved. You know, my first political protest, for lack of better wording, was healthcare related, and it was in 2019. And I had never gone to Queen's Park. At that point, I think I had dabbled in a couple tours, maybe some educational visits. Um, but here I was on the lawn and trying to have a voice heard. Um, and then the last part that I always recommend is media. I think people shy away from the media, especially as nurses, because they're always afraid of what they're going to say, how it's going to be interpreted. Um, some employers are more supportive than others, especially of a nurse having their voice. But we're experts, and I think we should be treated as such, and we should actually have our way in because we can change those policies, right? So I did a lot of media during the pandemic and during my both campaigns initially, just discussing, you know, some of the healthcare changes, some of the bills. Things get passed really quickly at Queen's Park, especially if it's a large bill that has many, many components to it that people do actually miss some of the context and how it impacts them.
So, contacting your local MP or MPP, more importantly, I'm going to explain why that is in a second. Incredibly important for all of us. I do now call them all during the election from where I live. And I say, you know, I just need a moment of your time. And granted my position that I have at WeRPN, they do tend to, you know, get back to me pretty quickly, but all of you should be doing that. They want to know what the issues are. Most of them. I've only encountered one ever that didn't want to know them. Literally didn't want to know them. But one of the other things we say, Ashley, is that we tell our members when they release a platform, which of course this past election, platforms were released so late in the game. But when someone releases a platform, print it up and highlight it. And when someone knocks on your door, when the Ashley Fox is out there and knock on your door, I like to pull the highlighted paper out, and as soon as they see that you've highlighted their platform, I mean, they always wish that they had knocked on your door, but I think it's really important that we show people that I'm a nurse and I'm very interested in this thing you said, and I want to talk about it. I really like this piece. I did have just a really wonderful 30 minutes with Jack Layton at the Parliament Hill in Ottawa. We went there for a practical nursing pan-Canadian day, and he said, "Do you know how to lobby the provinces differently about healthcare than the federal government?" And I said, "I don't." And he sorted that out for me. So really, the provincial government is the government that make the decisions that impact you the most. So, which is exactly what Ashley was trying to become part of. And so, you know, when there's a provincial election, really focus in on those people. Um, so outside of politics, you know, if we want to do little a advocacy, what are the ways that we can advocate within our own, not so much necessarily at Queen's Park, but within our own environments.
One of the things that I've noticed, and it's a theme right across, some people get involved in municipal. So they start talking about, okay, something as basic as crosswalks or access to services that are going to improve health. I think in my area, there's quite a few busy roads and streets, and there's always a conversation for seniors or children, right, to be able to access. So having a voice that way. You can look at various different levels of government, and then you can also include obviously your workplace, your school, different environments. Really, what it is looking at something that you want to change, something that has the capabilities of changing. I don't want you to look at something super big, like we're going to implement lunch break between 12:30 to 1 every single day, like it's just every single person. But you got to look at what the informed decision is. Okay, if we split our shifts, certain breaks or certain times that we're going to have different people on the floor, or we were actually just talking earlier this evening about PSWs and having support on the floor. I know that there's still a lot of healthcare facilities that haven't implemented support for that. So, making an informed decision and saying, here's the pros, here's the cons, looking at things that can influence it, obviously, funding, costs, things of that nature, and just helping make a decision. Like it doesn't have to be super big. It's really just looking at the pros and
Right.
cons and how can we have this. And if we can't, if you're like me and you want something done like yesterday, because typically my personality, it's making that informed decision and then going back, making sure that you have follow up, making sure that you're having those discussions. One of the things that just doesn't fly with me, regardless of politics or nursing, is we've always done it this way. That's like I absolutely hate the saying. And the second thing is we'll follow up. Well, I can guarantee you, I'm one of those people that puts it on my calendar, whether it's politics, nursing, anything, we're going to follow up. If the answer is no, the answer is no, but at least we have to have those informed discussions, right? We can't just make decisions without actually looking at the whole picture.
First of all, people maybe don't know this about you, Ashley, but Ashley is one of those nurses that doesn't see the hierarchy in healthcare and has spent a great deal of her time advocating for PSWs to have some dignity in their roles as well, that sort of thing. So I know, that's near and dear to my heart as well. So I really appreciate that in you. And if all of this just isn't your cup of tea, you can join your professional association because we're doing it every day. I mean, today I'm on the phone with the conservatives and I said, can I have one more minute of your time? Because there's something that a message I wanted to get across that I hadn't done yet. And he said, just 1 minute, but I got it all in that minute. So we're doing it for you. If you don't want to get out there and do that, that's not your thing. Always know that when you join WeRPN, we do it for you as well. But we really want you to get out there and really speak to these people who are actually, it doesn't matter who's at your door, which party they're in. Generally they're really nice people. So that's just something that we love to encourage you to do. So let's talk about your experiences on the campaign trail, because I was fascinated by it. I've, engaged with politicians for 20 years now in this role, but never have I watched someone up close as they ran, just kind of laser focused on their writing. And my own writing, paid some attention here, but for the most part, I watched your writing. I noted that you were running for a party that really never wins in that riding. So you had your work cut out for you, but you have run twice now and did so much better the second time. You're making headway, Ashley. I hope that we're going to continue to see you running. I suppose that's up to the party themselves, but I was super impressed. But let's talk a little bit about what that was like. Um, are there any specific stories or experiences that you can share from the campaign trail?
Oh, there's many. There's many. And they stay with me. Like there's being fully transparent. Most people are aware that I'm very active on social. So I use Ashley Fox RPN is primarily my political platform for all social media platforms. And people will reach out. Between elections, I get a lot of conversations, how to navigate, how to access services. my personal favorite is I'm not being heard or I'm yelling into the void. I'm happy to navigate that for them. But there's a few stories that really will stand out to me this time. And the first was it's February, it's snow, and the writ had just dropped. So when the election's called, that's the time period that they've decided, and it's the election day is determined from that, and it's actually being dissolved at Queen's Park for the campaigns to happen. I had an inkling, even though it was a snap election, that it was probably going to happen within a couple weeks. So typically the writ drops on a
Mm.
Wednesday. I can tell you for the previous 2 Wednesdays before the writ dropped, I don't think I slept at night. I literally was
Me too.
staying up watching because I'm like, it's going to be called. It's going to be called. Nope, it's not. Okay, back to work. Let's get going. Let's do things.
Yeah.
But somebody reached out via Meta 1 in the morning. What, literally 1 in the morning. I saw it first thing in the morning. Went 1 in the morning. Wow, that's impressive. Like the writ has just dropped. Most people for a couple of days are like, are we having an election? It takes them a little bit to catch on. They were very specific and they went, oh my gosh, Ashley, how do I vote? Do you know how I vote? I'm going away on holidays. I need to know. And I went, I don't know, but hang on a sec. Let's go find out. But that's the first time I've ever had someone reach out in a panic, instantly looking for a response. It's going to stand out to me because bless that person. They were very proactive. They were very, I have to vote. Like, this is what we're doing. And I am so impressed. I'm just so impressed. I really am. And we can talk about those experiences as we go on, but generally speaking, the majority of people know their civil responsibilities, know their civil rights, are very actively engaged. If they're not actively engaged, they're at least going to vote. Like that's half the battle. But there's still a percentage of people that unfortunately, you're offering rides, you're calling them multiple times a day. I'm sure it's very annoying for people, but there is actually studies that show, people do not get out to vote, which is unfortunate. I mean, we know
Yeah.
the rights and we know what's happened to lead to those situations, right? Um, Other stories, I mean, there's always funding stories that really are near and dear to me. Of they someone's tried to access services, didn't qualify, or qualified and had it taken away for whatever reason. Those ones are always very very near and dear to me. And dare I be bold to say, I do actually send them information to say, here's the people to contact, even though we're on a campaign. I can't help you, but these people will. It's something that just sits with me, right? It's the nurse in me of please follow up. There's a lot of conversations about unhoused, and primarily in the rural communities where I'm situated.
Really.
There's not there isn't access to services, right? So a lot of people are going living in tents, living in forests, living in access to things. Shelter beds are very very slim to begin with,
Mm.
and if there is any openings, it's an hour away, right? It's in an urban community. So we're looking at, okay, transportation, how do we get you there? Um, that particular population was already in mind because when I met that population in 2022, they were already very disheartened of why should I vote? What's the point? What like how are you going to help me? Like they were very a very different mindset than some of our other population. And again, it influences their lives, right? Their lives really do depend on how we're voting. Um, it was snow. There was a lot of people asking me, how do I get out and vote? Or I can't get out and vote. I live in a community for whatever reason. Elections Ontario is fantastic. And again, they're nonpartisan as well. So I'm going to sing their praises here. But they did, in-home ballots. They'll bring the ballot box to the house. Um, they would
Wow.
um, they would do anything to help. Honestly, they were just so fantastic. People typically mail in their ballots. You have to register, a mail-in ballot sent to you. And typically you have to mail it back by a certain deadline. This time around, they said, please, if you can't mail it back, bring it into the returning offices or Election Ontario offices, and we will look at it. I heard of complications of people in Europe, people in Florida, snowbirds, things of that nature, right? Being able to use like Purelator and FedEx and things to kind of speed up the process because
Yeah.
there really wasn't a lot of time. Um, it was really inspiring. The other thing that I remind people as nurses, we kind of have a little bit of advocacy that we can help with that too. So, if someone's telling you that they want to get out and vote and they can't, providing them with even the Elections Ontario number is half the battle because they can, find the resources that they need to access there. Um, and then the last one was, again, people that are living in situations that we've created by policy that are not priority. So some of my folks in community living centers, There was a lot of conversation about their parents being an aging population. Who's going to look after the adult child, or how are they going to access services? And there was a lot of questions about priorities, right? So Premier Ford had announced his intentions for the election was related to a mandate to fight Trump, was essentially what my conservative candidates were saying. But that wasn't a conversation at the door. I heard a
Mm.
lot, and maybe it's the nurse, but it also, I think if I wasn't a nurse, I think this still would have had the same conversations. You know, surgeries on hold, no family doctor for years. How do they get medications? The government requires certain forms to be completed, but the emergency department can't fill them out. You know, how do we access services? It was really quite heartbreaking because there was so many things that I feel like they were being, the proper term is neglected. It was
Yeah.
brushed under the rug, and there was no one actually strongly saying, hey, we need to deal with this.
We also live in not the same environment we used to live in. Let's talk about signs for a moment. This past election, we had a sign at the front of our house, and it was there right through the election until it was over. But down on the corner, there was a sign up down on the corner of our. I live on a side road, and it disappeared shortly after it went up. How new do you think this situation is? Can you talk a little bit about that situation? Because I know you talked about it on your social media.
It's wild. So I don't think a lot of people are really truly understand that, as funny as it sounds from a political party or a big political organization, signs and digital ads, pamphlets, brochures, all of that comes from donations. So that is people that are committed to supporting you and what you're standing for, whether that's the party, the person, leader. There's various reasons that people do what they do. Um, but it's financially, we talk about being fiscally responsible, and I can't imagine destroying signs. I really can't. The winter was hard because there was 20, I think 28 days or 26 days. So for some candidates, myself previously running, I had additional signs. So I had signs to work with before I began. For some of the newer candidates, they couldn't even get
Yes.
them ordered during that time frame, right? And that's just wild to me, because how do you get your voice out? It's not the most environmentally friendly, but we do know there's statistics to back, visibility and signage and things like that.
Right.
It's wild. Honestly, I did not have any provincial signs go missing. They were buried in snow, I'll be honest with you. Buried in snow, or snowplows were my worst enemy in February. Actually
Bad
watched a couple
timing. Bad
literally hit
timing.
by a snowplow and went, really? I don't want to dig that out later. We were still digging them up about a month ago. I actually still was finding provincial signs. Um, but I didn't have any go missing. And because of the weather, I was using smaller signs, which have a wire frame, so they could sit in the snow a little bit better. For some
Yeah.
of the folks in Toronto, I mean, they were using blow torches and warming, warming the ground and actually getting big ones in.
Oh,
So
how do they get
impressed.
them
I
in the
could not have done that.
ground?
Right. So they
Wow.
actually were putting them in. But we didn't see them really go missing at a high level. Federal, we did. So this past federal election about a month ago, even my signs on my lawn went missing, and I have had political signs on my lawn here for 5 years. So it was very pleasantly surprising
Yeah.
to me. Yeah,
It is also illegal.
yeah,
And
it is.
people
Mhm.
engaging in that sort of behavior. One other thing, Ashley, um, when I say that Ashley handled this, well, nurses have a resiliency that doesn't necessarily that's unique, or that I would say is unique to nurses. And so I'm following Ashley. She'll make a post, and I'm reading every comment underneath because I'm very interested in what Ashley's got going on. And I had some sobering moments, Ashley. It's one thing to believe in a political party and to, endorse a candidate's, to share beliefs with a political party. But it's another thing to personally attack someone who is putting themselves out there to try to represent people at the provincial level. And I read some of the comments that weren't anything about politics. And I messaged Ashley and I said, is there anything I can do for you? And absolute grace. didn't even say, yeah, that's really hurting my feelings. It just, can you talk a little bit about that?
And it's funny because if you had asked me in 2022, I was so sombered by the idea back then of, oh my gosh, somebody actually wrote something like that. That's horrible.
It's
Meanwhile,
shocking.
2025, Ashley was like, yeah, okay, yeah, whatever, like yell in the void, or, I've muted you at that point. Um, I've always said to people, like, we can have discussions about policy. Absolutely, 100%. Like that is politics, right? It's being able to have those informed decisions and conversations. What I won't tolerate, and I mean, it's been probably something I've had for the last few years, is, the immediate vulgar language, the immediate attacks. Um, I've seen everything from, and again, with women being predominantly uh, female nurses, where I think we see some of that already, right? In the
Right,
field, as unfortunate as it
right.
is, the attacks on height, weight, hair color, nails, personality, things of that nature, just things like that we really shouldn't have to dispute. It's very similar in politics. In 2022, I was 5 months expecting, going to people's doors, still working as a nurse, and being a nurse. And this one has stood out to me as someone at their door was very kind. I introduced myself. They responded. As soon as I got to the political party piece, they immediately became threatening, like hostile at the door. And I went, yeah, this isn't safe. I wish them well, married on my way. But the fact that they wanted to escalate the situation was just uncalled for.
Unbelievable.
Online it's very similar. So some of the comments you're probably referencing, and again, literally have no weight in my mind this time around, which is hilarious. And I won't give them the satisfaction of that. I really won't, because there's so many things in a campaign that you have to pay attention to that very, very small, very small quota there. We had individuals that would use emojis to like indicate they were flipping someone off, or giving a middle finger. We had individuals that would comment everything from hair color, weight. I'm sure you're a nice person, but the wrong party. Very explicit, though. It was never that simple. Um, and this time around, it was interesting because generally speaking, you will see that on every campaign page. It doesn't matter who the candidate is or the party. Like, there's
Yes.
just people out there who just feel the need to yell into the void. Um, but what's interesting is you always see those posts still remain, and they're not addressed, they're not talked to, they're just kind of left because it does give a bit of engagement, like on social media,
Yep.
unfortunately. And I think they're hoping that, there's conversation. But this time around, I was very specific on who I would have responses to. And I did have feedback from various members of the public who had said, oh, you're Ashley, when I meet them at the door, and they'd be, oh my gosh, I saw your page. Oh my gosh, I saw what people are writing. For example, the gentleman who felt the need to flip me off. I said, look, I very bluntly just put a one liner, would you do that to a nurse in your life? And they responded and they were like, well, no. And I said, so why do you think that's acceptable here? And it really just left them, again, whether or not that influenced their life, I'm not sure. But the fact that it was called out, because it does need to be called out, it needs to be okay. You want to have a discussion about policy, let's do it. But really, like that's your rationale. It's not appropriate. Um, and it goes further than that, right? I mean, I have a toddler now. There was a lot of conversation from people of um, parenting styles, various things. But unfortunately, a lot of the comments, it's always a little more challenging, I would say, for females in politics,
Yes.
because there's so many double standards, so many double standards. Um, there's candidates that I'm aware of that take a lot of photo opportunities with their children that are male. And I say this because it's a pure example with mine is if I take a picture with my daughter and we're at an event or we're promoting something, the comments I will get is who is raising your daughter? Or if you go into politics, who is going to look after her? And it's like, okay, you don't ask the gentleman up the street the same question, right? It just doesn't make sense to me. It actually triggered me into another one as well as I got a message that came through. And again, that one wasn't vulgar, but it was if you're running for office, are you expecting nurses who are already short-staffed to cover for you while you're gone? And it was interesting because I thought about it and I went, well, how is that any different than any other sector? If a teacher takes a leave or, goes on to do something else or goes on to something differently. And I've always been very blessed that if I didn't have that support or I didn't feel comfortable reaching out to my colleagues, I wouldn't do it. Like that's just something that comes down to it. But I've had opportunities, as you mentioned, to go, to the College of Nurses, to participate in various other organizations and groups. And I've always had that opportunity to have that conversation with my colleague. I would never leave them short-staffed. We know that that's reality for many sectors. But if we always have that mindset of, oh, we actually can't run because she's needed in her field, we're never going to have people put their name on a ballot.
Exactly.
And we need people to have their voice, right?
For sure. I also, you don't have to get angry, and you didn't at those people, like you said, over your head, but you don't have to get angry at those people because I was angry enough for both of us. I was furious when I read those comments and just embarrassed, just embarrassed that, we don't know better. I've got a look, just a simple question, just because I'm curious. When people have signs out in their yard, and it was a very short election, so there wasn't the number of signs you usually see, but when people have signs, and they are obviously supporting a different party than yours, do you go to their door?
And there are people that will. It depends. In my community, I recognize who those homes are. Um, some areas I've
Oh,
gone,
yes.
other people I don't. It depends on the situation.
Yeah.
Um, it really does, because there's some that I'll wave, if we're outside to have a conversation. It's also interesting because this election and in 2022, I've seen yards with multiple signs. And this is actually a conversation which is just
Fantastic.
purely funny, right? Because you don't
Yeah.
think of it. I had seen some posts on social media where someone had taken a photo of a lawn sign or a lawn that literally had 4 signs. And the person had jokingly wrote like, "Oh, make up your mind." Well, the reality is there's multiple voters in that home.
Yep.
Um, and we've actually had it where someone's requested a sign of mine and I've shown up to deliver it, or somebody on the team has, and there's already a sign in their place. So we always double check first and say, hey, like,
Yeah.
you actually, like, sometimes I hate to say it, there's trolls, there's pranksters, there's people who are just
Sure.
trying to waste time. Not often, but there is. And so we'll ask them. And a lot of the conversation they'll come back is, oh, absolutely. Like put all of you on there. Like we want to support you, what your thoughts are. We want to support your platform. We want to support you. The other part that comes with that is the strategic vote. So knowing that when we actually look at
Yes.
polls and data, generally speaking, there's friends or family who are running for other parties who might not necessarily be as high up on the platform. They might be running independent. They might be running in different avenues. So they still want to show some form of support,
Yeah.
but also at the end of the day, showing a different voting strategy. But it's so entertaining to me to actually have a lawn with 4 signs, like, and not in a bad way entertaining. I'm just so impressed
No,
that somebody, it's so fantastic.
I agree. I think back to, the 50s and the 60s where, there'd be two voters in a household, but the husband would decide what the votes were going to be, and that's what they were. And you see multiple signs and you realize, no, you can be a family and share just different opinions on those things. Back to nurses again, because really that's why we're here. Should nurses vote for other nurses who are running regardless of the party so that the nurses will vote, so the nurses' voice is in the legislature?
It's fascinating because I can see both sides to that. So I'm very familiar with our nurse elected officials across various parties,
Yep.
provincial and federal. And I don't know if I am very obviously pro nurse, very much so that we're under the same code of conduct. We still follow the same policies and guidelines, hopefully still follow the same ethical framework. But I do both. I say, look at the nurse, because that obviously there is an education there. There's a background, and what they have to align with ethically. But I also say look at the platform and what the party will do as well. I have met many non-nurses at debates and all candidate meetings who will tell me there's robust conversation among every party. And I don't know necessarily that I agree that that happens. I think there's probably some discussion. I don't know if there's
Hmm.
necessarily that same level of weight for decisions. And some of the decisions that have come out provincially don't sit well with me if I was a nurse. That sounds awful to say,
Yeah.
but we have to be mindful. Um, so I don't know necessarily if I would vote immediately because of it being a nurse, but I think there is some benefit to knowing what nurses do, right? Knowing that, they are going to have
Yeah.
that mindset.
Yeah, I had meetings, a lot of meetings at Queen's Park today, but one was with a physician and one was with a nurse. And it's so nice just to be able to say, okay, so, and then speak, nurse speak, and they get it. Like you don't have to explain the acronyms, and you don't have to, like, they just get it. So that's nice for me, but that's a really interesting thought that we kind of mull over. So we're going to leave a few minutes for questions, but I have one last question. I feel like CNN right here. But what I want to ask you is, will you run again?
There's a lot of people who have asked that question, particularly post debrief. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit and then you can decide what my interpretation from that is. But in 2022, when I ran, I thought, what am I getting myself into? As one does, right? You get on the campaign trail, you get going, and you go, I don't know, can I do that? Like, oh my gosh, I can do that. Like, there's just so many highs and lows on a campaign. When we were done 2022, we came home, and my father-in-law, who is no longer with us, but he had said, "Are you going to do it again?" And I looked at him and I went, "I don't know. I don't know. I don't know." And initially, I really wanted to. I'm not one to throw in the towel. I fight for what I believe in. I fight for my patients. I fight for my family, loved ones. And I started fighting, right? I immediately went back to defending our hospitals, protecting what we had and making sure that people were actually listening, not just saying they're listening, but actively listening. And during that time frame, I met a lot of people across partisan lines, across various parties who went,
Mhm.
"You're my choice. It's not the party. It's not Ashley. It might be Ashley, actually, in many cases, I'll be honest." But they went, "We're worried about healthcare. We're worried
Yeah.
about education. We're worried about our kid. Um, worried about jobs." It's all interconnected. It's all under the social detriments of health, right? We look at so many things. You need a nurse for that. So I jumped in full force. 2025 went, you know what? I have supporters across party lines who need an advocate, and I'm going to be that advocate. You know, I think there's going to be a different precedent going forward for elections and how times are. And obviously, I'm not the only deciding factor. There's parties, there's nomination contestants, things like that. I think my heart is always going to be in politics. I think there's always going to be a role for
Um,
me regardless. Mhm.
yeah, so proud of you, Ashley, because RPNs are impressive every day, and now we have another reason to have a lot of pride. So Julie has hopefully a few questions for us that she can share with us for Ashley.
I don't see any coming in yet, but I have to say, like, if I would have had my camera on, you would have seen me actually just nodding for the last
Oh,
45 minutes to everything you were saying. I wonder if, I mean, you both covered a lot of ground, so it's possible that we've just covered everything, but we'll give it a second. And I encourage you to stay on the call because we are going to do a little spin the wheel draw at the end as well for a great prize.
And we do have good prizes this year. We have launched a sort of new tagline this nursing week for our association. Practical meets powerful, and for our nurses who we represent, practical meets incredible. So we're launching that, and you might just get something that says that if you see in the line. I think there's a question there.
There is.
Julie?
Lori's asked a question. So if you could tackle one healthcare issue, what would it be, Ashley?
oh, limiting it to one is tough, but the current mindset and the current atmosphere that we're in, my current healthcare choice would be tackling vaccine hesitancy and tackling public health cuts. And because we see that that's influencing every part of the sector, right? Seniors,
Yeah.
kids, the public, that would probably be my first thing to tackle. And knowing, we're in a significant measles outbreak, it's just awful. I think there's a lot of value in going back to preventative health and being proactive.
Absolutely, absolutely agree.
So we have another question. Oh, there's others coming in, which is great. So how do you stay positive when you're faced with challenges associated with running for political office?
Find a really good support team. And it doesn't necessarily have to be large. Some of the people in my closest circle are people who've navigated the waters with me, who know when you need pardon my language, like a kick in the butt, when you need to rally yourself again and get that morale. Um, I find myself really inspired by the strong female leadership that I have associated with my campaign. They know what I'm capable of. They know when something's off, that they can mention it to me, or if I'm just,
Mhm.
head in the clouds, not focused. But I think the key feature too is honestly the kick in the butt. Even this campaign being as short as it was for 28 days, the last week was really heavy, really heavy. You come out of debates, you come out of policy. As much as I don't let comments and people at the door weigh you down, there's usually a couple of them that at that point really are on your mind. And you just need someone to kind of remind you what you're fighting for, what you're doing, and put you back into that mindset that you need. I'm very fortunate that I have great former candidates and current candidates from 2022 and 2025 that I can reach out to and say, hey, I need to chat. Or they just know something's not right and they'll provide me with the guidance I need.
That's great. So what do you believe each of us as RPNs can do to advocate for ourselves regarding wages and staffing ratios? Where do we start? Who do we approach first? And what should we say? I think this is a great question for both of you.
I was going to say, I would, there's power in numbers. One of the things I've learned as an RPN, if you want to make an informed decision, is reaching out. So I know I've even reached out to, the practice consultants. I've reached out to WeRPN and said, hey, I have an idea or something along those lines. Um, there's definitely power in numbers because they can push that information out, make sure that it's being shared. But then you also have some advocacy you can do on your own as well, right? There's nurses in your area. Get chatting with them. So many of us are on social media. So many of us are able to share our messages and have found success that way. Um, Sometimes it's even just as simple as getting the public onto our messaging, right? Because they will share it too. They just need to know what's happening. And then it's also working collaboratively. So, with our RN counterparts and our NPs, we have a lot of similar stressors, similar things that we can promote. There's power in numbers in that as well.
And I would add, I was at Queen's Park today where France Jelena, who is the health critic for the NDP party, launched another attempt at a bill to ensure nurse to patient ratios, or they call it patient to nurse ratios, but it's hard to get out of something you've been saying for years. It's called Write This Down.
I think, oh, she's back there. We almost made it to the end without technical issues. Dianne, you're freezing. Okay.
Well, and leading with that too, you've got, she mentioned with brands even working on certain things. There's other parties and other MPPs that are always happy to hear, right? That's another segue. I was blessed, in between elections to have met with Chris Glover, an MPP who is advocating for, not having hospital ER closures be common. There's other MPPs, Mike Schreiner is working towards how do we advocate scope of practice for nurses? How do we help them with their wage disparity as well? It's really reaching out to them and taking a proactive stance.
Um, Sorry, lost connection. Like Ashley,
You're good.
I don't live in the center of a city. So, this is a farm. But I would add just the tail end of what Ashley was saying there. Get to know the difference between scope of practice and role, because scope of practice is what you're allowed to do in legislation. But role is what keeps you in the profession. And government funding for initiatives is really important in that particular circumstance. all the different things we need, workload management, appropriate wages, all of that isn't so much scope of practice as it is, the working environment around your role. Also, RPNs should be far more in leadership positions. You've got situations where you and intrinsically have great leadership within you, and situations where you should appear more heavily in leadership. So all of those things you can advocate for. I'm gonna try and make sure I'm not upside down. I think that worked. Okay.
There's a lot of influence too, if you can tie it to the patient population, right? So we've seen even the scope of practice conversations. I remember a few years ago when RPN scope of practice for wound care expanded, the RPNs were already doing the tasks, but there was a lot of fear associated with it because people didn't see that RPNs were already doing that task. And if we can just show, the public, one, that we're doing it, we're knowledgeable, we have the skill set, and that it increases our patient population access, like actually being able to access the services that all of us want to have. It does sometimes help with segueing things forward a little quicker in the government levels.
And for the folks who are thinking about it from that first step, and what do I say? We also work at preparing like cheat sheets and quick notes, kind of like what Dianne was talking about with the highlighter. If someone knocks on your door, we did send something out after the last election, so not that long ago, to our members. And you can certainly reach out to us at info@werpn.com, and we can provide you with some of the government relations type stuff that we've prepared that just helps with getting those conversations started. And we're happy to do that.